All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today I have a very fun and hopefully interesting stream to share with you guys regarding psychedelic themes and European fairy tales. Some of our favorites, such as Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, the whole mythology of werewolves, or what actually the scientific term is called lycanthropy, which is the shape-shifting, particularly into a werewolf due to the full moon. We're going to be getting into that. Little Red Riding Hood, Snow White, the Wicker Man, Little People, Tom Thumb, Magical Children, the Elf King, fairies, and their relationship to weddings is also something we're going to be getting into. And the Witch's Cauldron, which is going to be touching into a very popular and famous fairy tale known as Hansel and Gretel. And then we'll be talking about Arthur of the Woods. Now, are we going to cover all these? I'm not sure. Here's what I'm going to show you. I got tons. So all of these are about 4 pages to 5 pages long. So that'd be a ton of reading. If I just sat here and read all these things, we'd be here for a minute. But today's stream is actually regarding this book right here, The Hidden World, Survival of Pagan Shamanic Themes in European Fairy Tales. And this book is very, very interesting. Now, I'm going to warn you before we even get into today's stream, none of the content was actually written by Christians, okay? In fact, it was written by people who make arguments regarding the Eucharistic sacrament of Christianity, the Eucharist, communion, as being a sort of now non-psychedelic or non-inebriating form of these ancient practices. Obviously, we don't support this. I've done a lot of research into this, and a lot of it has to stem from the argumentation of the Mithraic rites, which certainly did use forms of heoma, particularly also psychedelic mushrooms, Stropharia cubensis, potentially Amanita muscaria. And so there's the particular scholar we're going to be reading from is a gentleman named Carl A.P. Ruck, and he's a classicist over at the University of Boston, or Boston University rather. But he has a few books that are quite interesting. Now, as I said, I have some criticisms generally of the sort of psychedelic scholarship regarding religion, generally speaking, and that is everything relates back to mushrooms. So when you look at some of the research, they see psychedelics in everything. Everything points somehow to a psychedelic ritual. Psychedelics are the origin of all religion. In fact, he even claims that in this book right here, Entheogens, Myth, and Human Consciousness. See Carl A.P. Ruck. However, the stuff that he writes is fascinating and at times connects very, very interesting dots. So we're going to be reading from this book mostly. You can see I've got tons of tabs everywhere. But I wanted to share with you, again, some of the books. So I'm working on a paper right now, basically an academic paper that I'm going to be turning in related to the presentation I gave over at Orthodox Montanica and Helena, Montana, not Montanica. But I'm trying to write that paper. And so I've been going through, like yesterday, I want to show you some of these books that I've just been going back through and rereading, and trying to refresh myself on. So here is the Entheogens, Myth, and Human Consciousness. Again, Carl A.P. Ruck. Here is one that is very interesting, Mushrooms, Myth, and Mithras. If you want to see the relationship of psychedelic mushrooms in the Mithraic rites. Again, the Mithraic rites coming from Zoroastrianism. So the ancient Persian religion, Zoroastrianism, if you're not aware, is the first monotheism, at least within the field of religious studies. That's how we describe Zoroastrianism, as the first monotheism. And they worship fire, a primordial fire, Ahura Mazda. But Mithra, that gets developed as that tradition moves westward into what we would call Mithraism, or the Mithraic cults, and much evidence still exists under Rome and parts of Italy of the prominence of that cult in the ancient days. Now, again, the subtitle is "The Drug That Civilized Europe," right? The drug cult that civilized Europe. So we're going to be hearing things again. The basic argumentation from Carl A.P. Ruck is that he thinks that the Eucharist itself stems from an ancient practice of inebriating substances. Now, we've talked on this channel about the concept of logos spermaticos. Logos spermaticos meaning that pieces of truth can exist in a variety of different world religions, different places, different times. The question is for the people who say that all religions lead to the same mountaintop, well, what framework of knowledge, we call this epistemology in philosophy, what epistemological framework are you using to make that claim? Unfortunately, most people don't realize that they're not using any one epistemology. They say, well, this in Hinduism, and this in Buddhism, and this in paganism, and this in tribal traditions, and this over here in Christianity. It all means the same thing. Based on what? Of course, they can't answer that question. So Logos Spermaticos gives us a framework to see truth present in a variety of world religions, because we don't deny that truth can exist outside Orthodox Christianity. However, I have a very different take than Carl A.P. Ruck or many of the scholars that are going to be referenced or mentioned today. They see all these things prefiguring the Eucharist, meaning the Eucharist is the same thing as it. I believe, as an Orthodox Christian, that the Christian Eucharist is actually the culmination of all these ancient traditions. So this idea that the elixir of immortality, if you're familiar with Taoism and the quest for the Taoist monks in the various Chinese mountains, they are looking for the elixir of immortality, and there is considerable evidence that the Taoists were inebriated, that they would find mind-altering mushrooms, mind-altering plants, ingest them, and claim that they were moving towards the elixir of immortality, finding immortality. Now, many of the archaic shamanic psychedelic rituals were questing for immortality. That's why I see the actual Eucharist as being non-psychoactive. Yes, we use real wine in the Eastern Church, but certainly a spoonful is not enough to get you inebriated. The Mithraic rites using various wines, various beverages. We've talked about the Eleusinian Mysteries, which is another book, in fact, that he was a part of. So you guys have probably heard of The Road to Eleusis, Unveiling the Secrets of the Mysteries. And this is about the Eleusinian Mysteries, the who's celebration back in ancient Greece. If you were of anybody, we believe Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, they probably all participated in the Eleusinian Mysteries, which were related to the Minoan civilization and one of the last goddess-worshipping civilizations in the Western Hemisphere. I've talked about how psychedelic cults and psychedelics often are perceive the deity as feminine, as a goddess, or to worship the goddess, and so we see that in the Eleusinian Mysteries. But I just want to show you a few of these books that he has written that, if again, in case you're interested in some of this stuff, or debunking some of this stuff, or arguing against it, you at least know where to look. So this one is interesting again, and he has a lot of stuff that he's trying to argue that Christianity had a psychedelic mushroom, which again, I do not believe. This is another one that's very interesting. So we can see here the fresco. This is in the Baptistry of Parma, Italy. The Baptistry of Parma, Italy. This is the depiction of the Dormition, and this is Christ. And so there's a few things that we're going to be going over here, but this is called The Affluence of Deity, Alchemy and Psychoactive Sacraments in Medieval and Renaissance Art. So heretical practices could be stemming from the Manichaeans, from Gnostic Christianity, certainly have been present in Western Christianity. If you want to learn more about that, you could even check out the book, The Psychedelic Gospels. There are a few things that we will be getting into here regarding the basic tenets on how they try to find these psychedelics in various world religions. One is the single-footed or the single eye. They often attribute this to psychedelics. This is because mushrooms have a single stem. This goes back to this very famous book, Persephone's Quest, written by R. Gordon Wasson, Jonathan Ott, another famous psychedelic scholar, and of course Carl A.P. Ruck. Carl A.P. Ruck, being a classicist and having such a diverse background in various languages, he brings a lot of interesting things to the forefront. Again, not that I agree with him. I obviously don't, especially as a Christian. And often these things, they interpret Scripture, they interpret different things outside the context of the people who actually wrote it or the tradition that actually brought it forth. Though it's still interesting. So in Persephone's Quest, one of the articles here, each chapter is basically a different research article, and one of them, it talks about the single-footed deities, the single-footed gods within these mushroom cults of Mexico. So the single-footedness, again, when we're going to hear this as we move through some of these shamanic descriptions of the European fairy tales, but there's a history of these interpretations within scholarship, and then this is his famous book where he's trying to make the case of Christianity really being tied to these ancient psychoactive cults. And you'll see here, this is a now chemical depiction by Jakob Burma, and it's called Christi Testamenta. And you'll see right in the center there's something very interesting. It looks like the heart of the cross is a mushroom. And so what I perceive, having dove into this stuff and then later becoming a Christian myself, is that a lot of the prefigurings, a lot of the symbolism they try to associate to the Christian Eucharist, it always comes from these heretical, these alchemical, these Gnostic practices, okay? So nothing today is going to be from a Christian or supportive of our general worldview. However, I believe that you're going to find a lot of it very, very interesting, very interesting. And so one of my other criticisms with this general psychedelic scholarship, academically speaking, is that it's incredibly self-referential. So even though some of these footnotes are really, really incredible, and you'll see that throughout this book, I mean, every page is replete with footnotes. And so the footnotes are interesting. However, a lot of times they self-refer back to books already arguing the main premise, which I understand. Obviously, that's when you're trying to make a case. But sometimes it's the author referencing his own book or referencing another author within this book, his other book. Now, obviously, they can't talk about everything, so I get it. But one of the big problems with this psychedelic scholarship, looking at world religions, is that everything somehow always leads back to psychedelics. So we're going to be a little bit critical of there, but our main focus today is going to be on what's called the Amanita muscaria mushroom. So I don't know if you guys are familiar, so we're going to take a look real quick. So this mushroom right here, it's red and white. You've probably seen it on things like Mario Kart, Super Mario Brothers. It's in so many aspects of our culture. And in fact, there's a whole description of how Santa Claus is related to Amanita muscaria mushrooms. And so you can look here, if you look at old Christmas cards, you'll see, for example, right here, this is from 1904. You see this little elf surrounded by what appears to be Amanita muscaria mushrooms. You see 19th century postcards from Germany depicting Amanita muscaria mushrooms. These are very old. Here is an Amanita muscaria shaman from Siberia. You see she's holding up one of these mushrooms, and she's dressed like one of these mushrooms. This has led to a lot of people speculating that Santa Claus himself is derived from the Amanita muscaria mushroom cults. So what is some of the basis for that argument? Well, Santa Claus lives at the North Pole. The North Pole would be considered the Axis Mundi. The Axis Mundi, right? So the center of the world, or Yggdrasil. And what was Yggdrasil? Well, it was the world tree. It was the divine axis. And so when you start to unpack a little bit, and I'm not definitively arguing this, because obviously Christianity comes and Christianizes, sanctifies paganness. And this is part of our Orthodox theology. So if you're evangelical, you're like, oh my gosh, that's pagan, that's wrong. Well, again, our epistemology of logos spermaticos means that there can be true things in paganism. So it's true that on December 22nd, 23rd, 24th, the sun doesn't move for 3 days. Is that a prefiguring of Christ himself dying for 3 days and then resurrecting? Yeah, it very much could be that the cosmos itself is depicting a real, literal, historical event by our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who defeated death by death. But Santa Claus, if we get a little bit deeper into some of the symbolism, see, here's a much older Christmas card. You'll see here's an egg. You see these weird red and white mushrooms. Why is there such a history of the red and white mushrooms associated with Santa Claus? People would argue that it has to do with, again, Santa Claus, or Shaman Claus, as the people who advocate for this worldview. Shaman Claus lives at the North Pole, the Axis Mundi, the point of the sort of end of the world, right? You can't go any further than the Axis Mundi. And the Axis Mundi is typically a tree. Now, where do these mushrooms grow? They typically grow under birch and pine trees. So the idea of the Christmas tree is believed by many of the people of this theory that this is an ancient pagan practice of bringing in the trees in which these mushrooms actually grow under. And this is why we have gifts underneath the tree, because these trees have a symbiotic relationship with these, or these mushrooms have a symbiotic relationship with these particular tree species. And so they can't really grow outside of a particular environment or surrounded by these specific trees. And so if you were a shaman in Siberia, for example, where you have multiple Amanita muscaria cults, they would go and pick these mushrooms from underneath the tree. And then they would place them on the branches of the tree so that the sun could dry out these mushrooms. Again, imagine if you're in Siberia, there's snow everywhere. So you want to dry out these mushrooms. And these mushrooms are also considered poisonous. So anybody who's taken a Bio 101 class in college knows that the Amanita muscaria mushroom is a poisonous mushroom. And so you have to convert the ibotenic acid to muscimol, and you can do this through a variety of ways. And muscimol then is the psychoactive substance within these mushrooms. So the shamans will pick these mushrooms from underneath those trees and place them on the branches of those trees. That's how they dry them out so they can consume them later, because if you just ingest these mushrooms while they're still full and wet, per se, they can be extremely toxic. And so here is some more imagery we see of related with the mushrooms and Santa Claus, per se. Now, of course, this is all related to Siberian shamanic practices. This is totally divorced from St. Nicholas. This is totally divorced from Christianity and Christianity sanctifying practices that were already present in European cultures, especially the northern European sphere, so especially the Nordic countries. And the Nordic countries, again, had tribes participating in these Siberian Amanita muscaria cults. So let's get through the symbolism real quick. So Shaman Claus, he lives at the North Pole. The North Pole is the Axis Mundi. Yggdrasil is a tree. The tree is related to the growth of these particular mushrooms that are psychoactive and obviously very bright and noticeable in nature. You have to take these mushrooms from underneath the tree and place them on the tree branches to allow them to dry out so that you can later consume them. Now, according to our mythology of Santa Claus, he also has these little helper elves, and we'll get into today that elves are another motif of deep psychedelic experience. Now, some of you guys I know were probably previously, like myself, into the psychedelics pretty hardcore, and then you take really, really high doses, you see what Terrence McKenna even called the self-transforming machine elves. You see the leprechauns. You see the gnomes, right? So next time you see somebody who has gnomes in their yard, notice, do they have the red and white Amanita muscaria mushroom present? Because often they do. Very often it's this red and white mushroom. And so you have these little artificers, these helper elves, right, who helps Shaman Claus create toys to put back underneath the tree, right? So you take the gifts underneath the tree out, and then Shaman Claus replaces those with different gifts, the mythology of Santa Claus. But what about the reindeer? Well, interestingly enough, there's only a handful of species that eat these particular mushrooms. There's a handful of animals that actually get high, if you will, off the Amanita muscaria mushrooms, one of those being reindeer. And this is a known thing. So in Siberian shamanism, because these mushrooms can be toxic, often one of the ways that the shamans ingest the Amanita muscaria and the muscimol that's psychoactive is to drink the urine of the reindeer who first eat the mushroom directly. So the reindeer will eat the mushrooms right there off the ground, and then the shamans will wait to actually drink the urine of the reindeers, because the second time through it's already been filtered, and so it's still very psychoactive, I think 3 or 4 times through, yet it doesn't have all the toxins because it's already been filtered through the reindeer. So this then, according to people of this theory, explains why Shaman Claus flies on his reindeer. Because they're all been ingesting the Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and this is supposed to explain the red and white symbolism of Santa Claus himself. Now, it is debated, did Coca-Cola create the red and white colorings of Santa Claus? Some people believe so. Some people don't. But look, here is a 19th century depiction of a German Christmas card, and you see the red and white mushroom everywhere. The red and white mushroom. And this is going to be the same mushroom that much of our focus in regards to European folklore and Carl A.P. Ruck's discussion is going to be on. And you can even see these mushrooms right here in the front image. The red and white Amanita muscaria mushroom. And so now you can understand why Mario gets bigger when he eats the mushroom. These are all psychedelic sort of prefigurings, right? Very interesting imagery, to say the least. So here's another one, right? Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Why does she have a basket full of red and white mushrooms? Here's another depiction. And so you see the elves, which people claim to interact with in deep psychedelic space. You see the tree, you see the Axis Mundi, you see Shaman Claus, and then you see the reindeers, which is probably the most noted animal species that ingest these particular mushrooms. And that when you look at Siberian shamanism up in Siberia, that often those tribes drink the urine of the reindeer to get high, and therefore to bypass all the toxins, because the reindeer does it for them. So, very interesting stuff. Very, very interesting stuff. So this is the kind of things that we're going to be getting into today. I hope you find it interesting. Let's do a little housekeeping real quick before we dive in any further. And this might be a long stream. I don't know if I'm going to read all these things. Well, I'll describe that here in a minute. So first I want to say, guys, is the book club. If you guys are interested, we have the book club that is, where is my, here it is. The book club, if you guys would be interested in joining the book club, that's going to be going on this coming Tuesday. We have a book club, Logos Book Club, where we'll be reading the life of St. Maximus the Confessor. The first book club was a heck of a lot of fun. We were reading the first apology of St. Justin Martyr, looking at the theology of Logos and all that stuff. And so then, so if you would be interested in joining our book club on the life of St. Maximus the Confessor, one of my favorite church fathers, probably my favorite church father, is central to me coming back to Christianity and his theology of logos, logi, distinction. We're not going to be getting into the theology. We're just going to be reading about his life. So you can become a website member or not a website member. You can join the Logos Book Club using the link that I just posted. Now, if you would like to become a website member, which I really hope you would, this is a great way, guys. I hope to provide you guys quality content you can't get anywhere else. That's kind of the goal of the Church of the Eternal Logos and what I'm trying to do here. So if you appreciate what I'm doing, always pumping out streams, always coming with the heat, always bringing out nice, deep, quality content, the best way you could help me is just to become a website member for $5 a month. You get access to a growing video library. I can give you something in exchange that continually grows. You can give me $5 a month. And it's a great way to help me build what it is I'm trying to build here. Even if you don't have time to watch the videos, you can always go back and watch them. You know, that way you're not going to feel, unless you want to super chat. Hopefully people want to super chat today. But say you only want to give $5 and you can do a month, well, just become a website member. I'd rather you become a website member than just send me $5 on YouTube or something once every month. Just become a website member. And that way it's a monthly transaction, and you have access to something that I'm trying to give you value for. So become a website member, again, with the link that I just posted. And also, if anybody would like to do a one-on-one regarding theology, philosophy, whatever you'd be interested, goal settings, different readings, you want to talk about psychedelics and psychedelic research regarding world religions, I'm down. You can schedule a one-on-one using the link that I just posted. If I know some of the people in the chat have already scheduled those, and we have done those, so hopefully you guys enjoy those as well. So become sign up for a one-on-one if you would prefer. Preferably, please become a website member if you guys can. And then also another way to help out the Church of the Eternal Logos YouTube channel and what I'm trying to build is just go to the website and get some merch, right? There's plenty of merch over at the website, different types of things. And if you guys are able to help make some merch, if you guys have t-shirt ideas, you can design logos, help me out. I would be thrilled. If you don't have the money, you can't help me out financially, great. If you can create logos, help me out, and I can make some new t-shirts and grow my merchandise, that would be very, very beneficial. So getting merchandise is another way. Okay, so that takes care of the housekeeping as usual. Now let's just get into today's topic. So much to read. So as I said, we have a lot to get into regarding this book. I don't know if I can read all the sections that I talked about. So I assume there's some that are going to be people's favorites. I'll try to read it all. I just know it's going to be a bit time consuming. So again, if you guys like, feel free to super chat, help me out here, support the unique content here at Church of the Eternal Logos. And so the first fairy tale I want to get into regarding these mushrooms is actually Snow White. Snow White. So when we look at Snow White, here is a few little I'll keep some of the imagery up. So as we move through different fairy tales, I'll change the DuckDuckGo imagery so people can, at least who join us, can see what we're talking about. So I'm going to read, again, today's going to be a lot of reading, so put on your thinking cap. But the first one I want to read about is Snow White. And the basis of his argument is going to really revolve around the red apple. See, when you consume the Amanita muscaria mushroom, one of the noticeable things is that it causes people to become sleepy. So this is going to, again, appear in multiple aspects of these fairy tales, that when somebody goes into a sort of deep sleep or a deep trance, Carl A.P. Ruck's going to argue that this is related to the ingestion of Amanita muscaria mushrooms and under the aegis of the muscimol, the psychoactive substance in these mushrooms. So he's going to have a whole litany of argumentation. You don't have to believe all this stuff, guys. This isn't about me telling you facts. This is about me reading to you guys academic argumentation for these things, and some of it is very, very insightful. So here, let me just show you what I mean by the insightfulness of some of this stuff. So we're going to begin with roses, apples, and the fairy tale mushroom. Roses, apples, and the fairy tale mushroom. Snow White, Rose Red, and the world in hiding. The brothers Grimm recorded two tales told to them by their oral informants about a maiden named Snow White. And also, I guess I should highlight, guys, if you're not familiar, I was thinking this would be a whole nother stream in and of itself, is just reading stuff from the brothers Grimm. I don't know if you guys know who they are, but they are the ones that collected a lot of the European fairy tales. And so if you're not familiar with them, check them out. I was thinking there's a great website, actually, that has tons of the Brother Grimm. I'll actually show you that right here. So this website, it's called grimmstories.com. Let me share that link with you guys in the live chat. This is a great website to read a lot of the Grimm fairy tales that they've collected over time, and it's all centralized on one website. So if you guys aren't familiar with the Brothers Grimm, I think that would be a worthwhile stream in the future, that's talking about them, their scholarship, and then just reading some of these fairy tales. As you can see, there's tons of them. And they collected a lot of ancient pagan German fairy tales. That was what they were interested in. Anyways, continuing on. The brothers Grimm recorded two tales told to them by the oral informants about a maiden named Snow White. The one with the seven dwarfs and the boar's heart is the better known today because of the Disney film. The other with a single dwarf and bear lover, Snow White and Red Rose, is less so. Both versions are thematically similar in perpetuating the folklore of the fairy tale mushroom, a remnant of a very ancient ritual of shamanism, better documented in the great epic traditions of Europe. Like alchemy and the neoclassical, medieval, and Renaissance pagan revival among the intellectual elite, which is true, folk tales for the unlettered similarly preserved ancient and esoteric religious elements encoded so as to escape the censure of the church triumphant. This was done intentionally and at times, and at least at times, and the esoteric elements were actually emphasized by the early folklorists and artists as bizarre aspects of the tale. Occasionally, the secret is even blatantly revealed, but as with every mystery, it still lies hidden for those who don't have the eyes to see. Thus, in the version of Snow White with the seven dwarfs, an element of botanical lore lies hidden in the poisoned apple. As the story goes, the pregnant mother of Snow White had pricked her finger with the sewing needle as she gazed out the window, and 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow. The red looked pretty upon the whiteness of the snow, and she hoped her child would be as white as the snow, as red as the blood, and as black as the ebony of the window frame. The curious emphasis on these 3 colors obviously points beneath the surface to hide the secret answer to a riddle. What is white as snow, red as blood, and black as ebony? These are worldwide the most fundamental colors. The first 3 are to be distinguished in many cultures. The beautiful daughter fulfilled her characteristics in the whiteness of her skin, the redness of her lips and cheeks, and the blackness of her hair. The mother soon after died, and the king remarried. The truthful-looking glass of the jealous stepmother informs her, as the child grows, that she is no longer the fairest in the land, and she hires a hunter to take the maiden into the forest and kill her, bringing back her heart as proof that she is dead. He sets her free, however, and brings back instead the heart of a boar, which the queen, as an act of cannibalism, gruesomely eats, while Snow White finds shelter with 7 dwarvish miners. When the mirror tells the queen that the maiden is still alive, she attempts to murder her, visiting her 3 times in various disguises. The dwarfs rescue her from the first 2 attempts, but the third appears to be successful. The queen had devised a poisoned apple, so cunningly constructed that only the red patch on its white skin was deadly. Obviously, this is an unusual apple, since the fruit is not known to be white, although it imitates the rosy cheek of the white maiden. Snow White warily watches the queen eat the white and then accepts the red portion, whereupon she immediately appears to die. The grieving dwarfs place her corpse in a crystal coffin and leave her unburied on the mountain, where her body remained paradoxically uncorrupted, as if she were only asleep. Much later, a prince visits the dwarfs, sees the transparent coffin, and begs to have it. As his servants were carrying it away, they stumble on a tree stump, and the jolt makes the maiden cough up the poisoned piece of apple, so that she returns suddenly to life and marries the prince. At the wedding, the stepmother is forced to put on red-hot slippers of iron, and she dances until she dies. This is basically the version followed by the Disney film, except the prince's kiss is substituted for the stumble on the tree stump, as a more plausible and romantic cause for precipitating the revival of Snow White. Although the tree stump and regurgitated apple are integral to the original riddle, Disney also omits the essential but disturbing details of the stepmother's eating the bloody heart and her final ecstatic dance of death in the fiery shoes. Now he goes into the secret of the apple. Snow White's death was not a death at all, but just a hibernating sleep, which lasted only so long as she possessed the apple that caused it, the poisoned fruit with the defining colors that riddle the fundamental aspect of her own consubstantial identity. Even the stepmother uncountably knows of the pregnant mother's prayer and gleefully reiterates the riddle after killing Snow White. Quote, "White as snow, red as blood, black as ebony wood. This time the dwarfs cannot wake you up again." The cannibalistic stepmother, of course, knows of the mother's prayer because thematically she is the mother's substitute, who often performs some initiatory action that is commonly misunderstood as cruelty. The black of the apple is appropriately its wooden stem, like the ebony of the window frame. It's in itself a bizarre and rare wood of the window to be made of, calling attention to it as actually a gateway for opening up to another world. This is the common theme of shamanic consubstantiability with the entheogen that causes the rapture. Consubstantiability implies that the deity and the shaman both betray ethnobotanical attributes with the sacramental food that brings them together inevitably, since the spirit of the deity resides in the plant and also in the shaman who ingests it. The apple often is a metaphoric surrogate for the magical fruit. Snow White's acceptance of the forbidden apple perpetuates the tradition of Eve in the Garden of Eden. And so I'm going to stop right there and highlight that the Gnostic heresies that reemerged in southern Germany, in France, in Spain, in Italy, and even in England regarding the depictions of the original sin as a red and white mushroom eating, it's that the Gnostics venerated Eve, claiming that she ate the mushroom or ate the forbidden fruit and gained gnosis to the correct understanding. Now, we as traditional Christians do not believe that, and in no way does Christianity claim that it was an apple. Okay, so when you see scholarship try to establish this apple connection to Amanita muscaria or psychedelics, generally speaking, Christianity, orthodoxy, does not make a claim of what the fruit from the tree was. People have claimed it was an apple because apple trees are very common, but there is no definitive indicator that it was an apple per se or that it was red or anything like that. But you'll see the Gnostic heresies that believe the original sin to be the ingestion of a psychedelic mushroom, of which our author here does believe, they often equate that to each other. With the stepmother replacing the serpent. Thus, in the Grimm brothers' tale, knowledge is, in fact, in the possession of the stepmother in the form of the magical mirror. Mirrors, moreover, are traditionally an invitation to engage upon the spiritual journey beyond the reflective surface to the other world. And this is also true for any of you guys who have, any of you psychonauts out there who have done psychedelics. You know there's always a warning: don't stare in the mirror. Don't go looking into the mirror. Because when you do look into the mirror, weird things happen. There's weird mystical occurrences when you're high on psychedelics and you stare into a mirror, no doubt. So people have advocated to not do that for a very long time. Anyways, the fact that the maiden is tended by the 7 dwarvish miners, as well as the reversibility of her trance, indicates that she has experienced a journey to another world. For in the Celtic Indo-European lore, this world is paralleled by another peopled by little creatures. Again, and you see this throughout all use of psychedelics, this understanding of small people, gnomes, elves, this type of stuff. This world is paralleled by another, peopled by little creatures, most helpful, sometimes mischievous, usually to be found within certain mountains and hills, like the 7 mountains that the 7 dwarves mine, the number being indicative of the traditional 7 stages of initiation and shamanic ascent. These dwarvish creatures often are smiths, making golden goblets as drinking vessels, suggestive of the true nature of their treasure. The prince who discovers Snow White, who has also apparently dropped into this other world to visit the dwarfs, or is already an inhabitant of their realm, and significantly the lover and the revived maiden are returned to this world at the tree stump. The host of the special apple that had participated her trance, which is usually interpreted as an erotic and mystical union. She had dropped into a state that shared aspects of dream and death, a condition that shamans of the most diverse cultures access through rituals as the journeys to another world, and that is true. The secret of the poison apple that precipitated Snow White's trance among the dwarfs lies in the pharmaceutical folklore of the fairy tale mushroom. The stepmother, is poisoning the apple, would of course have placed the toxin on the red patch of its white skin. Ibotenic acid, which converts to muscimol, the visionary alkaloid in Amanita muscaria, is concentrated in the red skin of the cat, spotted with the distinctive scabby remnants of the shattered universal veil that once enclosed it during its egg stage. Thus, to avoid experiencing the intoxicating effects of Amanita muscaria, it suffices to peel off the red skin and cook and ingest the remainder, something habitual among those who know the lore of the mushroom and customarily employ it as a culinary item. Boiling the mushroom and discarding the water has a very similar effect. Similarly, rinses, salting, and aging, even without the removal of the skin, apparently can yield an edible mushroom. Thus, there are numerous accounts of fly agaric, which is another term for Amanita muscaria mushrooms, fly agaric, being prepared as edible food with no psychoactive toxicity. The tale of Snow White indicates the broad botanical expertise of the crone healers, such as the evil stepmother who knew explicitly which part of the mushroom could cause a visionary trance. Hey guys, smash that like if you are here. Would greatly appreciate getting those likes up while we're going through here. Smash that like. The mushroom, like an apple of the host tree to which it is linked, has a mycorrhizal parasite, is red, white, and black. The black being the rich, moist soil which clings to the base of the fungus, or the soil that often remains atop the mushroom as it bursts from the forest floor. Snow White has the same defining colors. Her skin is white, but beneath the blackness of her hair, her cap or her top, as viewed in the blood that colors her lips and rosy cheeks, is red. Unfortunately, the stepmother has eaten what she thinks is the bloody heart of the maiden, the red instead of the white. Significantly, this so-called heart was fetched from the forest habitat of fly agaric and was actually the heart of a boar, an animal that feeds voraciously on the mushrooms and often figures as one of the beasts that personify them. The figure of a, quote, hunter implies, moreover, the metaphor of a hunt, not only for animals, but also for such entheogenic plants that incorporate their spirits. So appropriately, the tables have been turned on the stepmother, and her deadly dance is caused by the red-hot shoes, forged no doubt by the dwarfs, who invariably tend to the netherworld, smithy, and the magical plants, mined gemstones associated with it. We might compare the role of Dionysius and the Menades in this ecstatic hunt for the viticultural botanical ancestors in classical Greece as the depicted on the Volute Greek crater in the National Archaeological Museum of Taranto, where a youthful Dionysius appears with his Menades as the consubstantial hunter crowned with opium poppy capsules. It was said that his mother, Semele, conceived him, in one version of the myth, not via the thunderbolt of Zeus, but by ingesting a potion made from his heart. It is Hephaestus in classical traditions who tends the netherworld's smithy with the versions of the dwarf, the single-eyed henchmen called cyclopses. Their one eye is another metaphoric attribute of the visionary mushroom, the single-eyed Arimasapians of the griffins who mine the subterranean gold plants. These same Cyclops' henchmen forged Zeus's thunderbolts, which are universally associated with the sudden appearance of mushroom Amanita muscaria. So let me clarify that. Yes, according to R. Gordon Wasson, when he looked at these mushroom cults in Mexico, wherever they saw lightning, they would, according to the shaman and the people who were consuming the mushrooms, they would run to wherever they saw the lightning strike, because they believed that where the lightning struck, mushrooms would grow. And to a degree, that is true. So you'll see when you leave the Amanita muscaria, the red and white mushroom, out to dry, it turns gold often. The red turns to a goldish color as the ibotenic acid, turns to muscimol. And so the gold apples, the red apples, the lightning bolts, you'll see the cyclopses, the single eyes, the little people. You'll see how he refers to these things over and over and over as indicating the Amanita muscaria mushroom. And the Bacchant ritual, talking about Bacchus, right? The Bacchus, the deity where people would get drunk. They would have orgies in celebration to Bacchus, the sort of wine god. And the Bacchant ritual, both the god and his ecstatic female devotees, the Minyades, are hunters, he seeking them and they him. They sometimes are seen in vase paintings offering a bunny to the god as the prey for the hunt. But they too are bunnies, impersonating the animal in a dance in front of the god. The characteristic staff always carried by the Minyades as the theros, and clearly indicates the botanical nature of his hunt, for it was emblematic of the gatherings of wild herbs. Okay. So, this is to say that the initiatory scenarios, including bestial transmorgification, are the expression of the psychodrama that corresponds to a profound need in the human being. Everyone wants to experience certain dangerous situations, to confront exceptional trials, to open up a pathway to the netherworld. And it is possible to experience all this on the level of one's imagination, by listening to fairy tales, or even better, at the level of one's dreams, by dreaming them. The events of the propagandists in the fairy tales are similar to that of the shamanic ritual, traceable back to prehistoric pre-period. Fairy tales, like myths, correspond in some way to archetypal truths. Okay, so now we're going to move forward to, well, here's one on the Beauty and the Beast. Beauty and the Beast here. So Beauty and the Beast. In the folklore of Beauty and the Beast, as collected by the Italian mythographer G. Straparola in his Pia Civoli Noti of 1550 through 1555, translated as The Knights of Straparola, edited and published in 1894, a version which Lang had included in the Blue Fairy Tale book, the lover, as in Snow White and Red Rose, lies under a curse whose sign is a red rose. He must appear as a beast until the beautiful maiden who has been abducted to his castle mediates between the two worlds of animal and human, and is released and releases him with a kiss. A similar duality can be traced back to the Amor and the Psyche myth in Apuleius's Metamorphosis, or The Golden Ass, a novel about the initiation of its main characters, Lucius, where the beautiful Psyche is led to suspect that her unseen handsome lover is actually a beast. When Psyche, who is named as the soul, or Suke in Greek, found that she had descended into Hades to fetch a magical ointment of beauty, she hastened to a certain high tower, determined to hurl herself headlong into the netherworld, but the tower dissuaded her, since that way was irreversible, and it directed her instead to the sacred cave at Taenarus as a better entrance into the infernal realm. But when she received the unguent casket of Persephone, there was no beauty within it, just a profound and Stygian hibernating sleep, from which she finally awoke with the prick of her lover's arrow. He had flown down from the lofty chamber where he was confined, no bear-like beast at all, as they had told her, but her divine lover, Eros. Okay, so that's his description of the Beauty and the Beast. Now we're going to get into lycanthropy. So again, as I told you guys, that is this phenomenon. So all the myths we've heard about werewolves, where do you think that stuff comes from? And so you'll see lycanthropy in folk tales. So this is talking about shape-shifting. This is talking about really the legends and fairy tales of men becoming werewolves in the presence of the full moon. So, you know, what is it, Teen Wolf? We even still make movies in the present period. The idea that people shape-shift into wolves. People believe that there's certain reptilian overlords who also can shape-shift. Making no claim about any of that. But we're talking about folk tales and the relationship between men shape-shifting into bears. Men shape-shifting into bears. John Pro says it always boils down to cannibalism and sodomy, which is actually true. We're going to see cannibalism play a central part in much of these discussions regarding the pagan psychedelic myths. That the cannibalism is going to come up multiple times, actually. So, you guys, smash that like if you guys have just joined. Would greatly appreciate it. Lycanthropy in fairy tales. These patterns of shamanic lycanthropy can be traced in folk tales. Thus, a wolf belt donned at the side of a particular tree or plant usually brings about the dream of lycanthropy. We might note that in the Greek Dolon vase, the heroes are wearing such animal belts around their ankles. In Grimm's, meaning the Grimm brothers, Der Wolfstein, the werewolf escapes the wrath of the sheepherder whose lamb he has stolen by turning it into a thorn bush. In Der Wolf, 3 harvesters had become tired from working in a field. Since none of them had taken food, they decided to lie down near a tree. 2 of them immediately fell asleep, although one only feigned sleep. But the, quote, 3rd workman, however, tied a wolf strap around his waist and crept up to a herd of horses that was gazing there. The best foal was just right for him. He grabbed it and killed it. The other harvesters saw what happened, but they wisely pretended to be asleep, for they were frightened and horrified. After the werewolf had satisfied his hunger, he took off the strap, and he came back, and he lay down to rest. But finally the others take some of his lunch to eat it. But upon seeing that their werewolf companion is complaining of a strong pain in his stomach, one of them says to him, quote, a person who eats an entire foal should not be surprised to feel stuffed and have stomach cramps, unquote. And to this, the wolf harvester replied, quote, if you had said that earlier, you would not be walking home on your own legs, unquote. He then threw his scythe away, tied the strap around his waist, turned into a wolf, and was never seen again in that place. This belt can be substituted by a ring, as in the case of the wife who also managed to serve meat to her husband, despite the fact that they both lived a life of extreme poverty. Upon her husband's begging her to find out how she does this, the wife reveals the secret that she was a female werewolf, and she permits him to accompany her on one of her hunts for the pack. Quote, together they went to a field where a herd of sheep was gazing. The woman walked toward the sheep, and as she approached them, she put a ring upon her finger and instantly turned into a werewolf, unquote. We are not told whether the ring was made of a wolf's fur, although in some versions of the tale, an actual wolf's pelt is substituted. A magical ring of metal would, in fact, be contrary to tradition, since metal, and especially iron or steel, was thought to nullify the power of werewolves. Quote, if one throws a knife, a piece of shiny steel, over the werewolf, he will instantly be transformed into the true form and stand there completely naked, unquote. In Arthur and the Gorlagon, a Welsh tale preserved in Latin in the 14th century, a conversion occurs via the use of a branch of a particular plant. There are 4 versions of this tale, and in one, the king's continued empowerment as king is linked to a particular tree and a special garden, and in the wood of this tree, that the property of affecting the lycanthropy, quote, in an orchard there begins to grow a branch, and at the very moment that the king is born, its properties are such that if one plucks the branch and strikes it with the head of the king while saying, quote, be a wolf and have the spirit of a wolf, unquote, the king immediately turns into a wolf. The wolf's name is Gorlagon. In one version, King Arthur acquires a pet wolf who is actually a man turned into a wolf by his wife with a magical wand, and the king turns him back into a man using the wife's wand. We might compare Bayat's tale of the glass coffin and possession, fictionally written in the 19th century character Christabel Lamotte. Here we encounter the prince of a perfect medieval kingdom transformed into a wolf dog by a black magician. And so he was actually linking, so his argument was linking the wolf vision. So the sanctity of the wolf and bear can be seen in the fact that in many localities they both have no name, for fear of conjuring them forth. He was talking about how certain plants are linked to the wolf and the bear, and that's why so many of these fairy tales have references to wolves and bears. Now, you could make the claim, obviously, and again, this is where, again, you guys need to be critical while you hear this stuff. You don't have to take all this stuff as face value, but well, bears and wolves probably killed people too, so there's a real mystery to them as well. But he links it to a particular plant, and he has different plants in different locations which are referred to as the wolf skin, wolf plants, all these different stuff. Okay, so here's one excerpt. Regarding the plants related to the lycanthropy transforming into a wolf. So here's an excerpt right here. With respect to animal metamorphosis and the journey to the other world, James Pearson writes, quote, "Another drug-linked element is the metamorphosis of humans into animals, or less frequently plants, that there were considered to be spirit familiars or spirit helpers. Species of the family Scalaceae are implanted in a large number of these transformations. Hesse informs us that a, quote, characteristic feature of Scalaceae psychosis is the intoxicated person imagines himself to be of change into some animal, and the hallucinosis is completed by the sensation of growing feathers or hair," unquote. Harner provides ample evidence that the Scolancios ointments were used in medieval times to facilitate the metamorphosis of humans into werewolves. Giovanni Battista Porta, a colleague of Galileo, wrote that, quote, "To make a man believe he was changed into a bird or beast, he drank a potion that was made of henbane, mandrake, stramonium, or solanum, maniceum, or belladonna." Barber, summarizing the clinical studies of hallucinogens, observed that nearly all subjects stated that their bodies feel strange or funny. More bizarre feelings are registered at higher doses, such as the body melting into the background or floating into space. And so then he begins to connect those plants and their presentation in various mythologies and fairy tales. So we're going to continue here. Again, we're skipping a lot, but we're going to get into these werewolves. So werewolves. So did people actually become wolves? This is hard for us to believe apart from the zoomorphic traditions of shamanism. Again, so shamans are often identified with particular animals to demonstrate the power of their magic, the power of their shamanizing. So did people actually become wolves? This is hard for us to believe apart from the zoomorphic traditions of shamanism. The evidence, however, is clear that something more than fantasy occurred. In the year 1691, a wretched old Latvian man named Theus, a self-avowed werewolf, was brought to trial. As the transcript preserves, he answered all questions with remarkable directness and candor, making clear that he and his fellows did not simply don wolfskins, but actually changed into wolves, as was proven by their being able to outrun the hounds. Quote, "The dogs were really always aware of them, but even when the dogs were alerted, they could not catch the werewolves. They ran much too fast for them," unquote. They still, however, preserve certain aspect of their human nature, such as cooking their meals, despite the inconvenience of having assumed the paws of wolves. Their rituals in a cave called the Hellhole around Christmas and St. John's Day were actually conducted for the benefit of the hunt and the success of the crop. But old Theus was near death now and would willingly renounce the rites, which he could do only by initiating someone else, the way he had first been made a werewolf. He need only to drink one toast to the initiate, breathe 3 times into a mug, and then pass it to one another with the words, quote, "You will be like me." And when the other took the mug, he became a werewolf. Presumably, he drank the mug. And yes, there were women initiated into the group, although they could not achieve the full power until they were mature, which probably means post-menopausal, the age and stage at which a witch or crone. The fact that the whole troops of people became wolves argues against the rites as purely delusional. Nonetheless, modern psychiatry recognizes lycanthropy merely as a cerebral dysfunction. The Encyclopedia Britannica defines it as a mental disorder in which the patient believes that he is a wolf or some other non-human animal. It is now considered simply a form of schizophrenia. As Antonio Torres Ruiz writes, quote, lycanthropy, the belief that one has been turned into a wolf, is not a form of sorcery, but an insanity. And in the case of those possessed, it is recommended that one first call in a doctor to enlist the services, even in illness of supernatural causes. Moreover, rabies physically induces rabid behavior in humans, and some instances of lycanthropy may have been of this type. Sometimes, too, lycanthropy is simply metaphoric, as in the case of the German werewolf Stube Peter, whose transformation into a wolf appears to have been only a way of accounting for a life of crime and violence, as in an account of him transcribed in 1540. Quote, thus continuing his devilish, damnable deeds, within the compass of a few years he had murdered 13 young children, and 2 goodly young women big with children, tearing the children out of their wombs, and most bloody and savage sort, and after ate their hearts, panting hot and raw, which he accounted dainty morsels, best agreeing to his appetite. Moreover, he used many times to kill lambs and kids, and such like beasts, feeding on them most usually raw and bloody, as if he had been a natural wolf indeed, so that all men mistrusted nothing less than this devilish sorcery. Similarly, metaphoric is if the fact that sometimes groups of fugitives or recently arrived foreigners were forced to practice a marginal and criminal way of life that the popular opinion identified with wolves, and for this reason they were called wolves, and it was thought that they had changed into that animal. Okay. The next one that I want to read to you guys is Little Red Riding Hood. So we're going to be getting in the ravenous wolves. We've been talking about wolves here. Now we're skipping a few sections and continuing on. But in Little Red Riding Hood, Little Red Caps or Cape in the Grimm Brothers version, as narrated to them by a well-educated French Huguenot woman named Jeanne Hassenplug, who knew literary sources as well as folk tradition. Here, let me change the image here to Little Red Riding Hood. All right, Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood, who literary sources as well as the folk tradition, the maiden heroine experienced lycanthropy. That is to say that she was, quote, eaten by a wolf and then ate the wolf. The English name as Red Riding Hood occurs in its first publication a century earlier than the Grimm Brothers, German, of the 1812s. Even earlier than the first English version is the French of 1697, where she called Le Petit Chaperon Rouge. It is a tale that occurs around the world, perhaps beginning, however, in northern Italy. The Tyrol and the Pyrenees, all good habitats for the mushroom. Red Cap is descriptive of her fungal persona, a little girl with the whitest of skin, who receives her name from the red cap she customarily wears, like a second skin over her head. The cap is usually constructed from red felt, and hence resembles the Mithraic bonnet rouge, and may well be a perpetuation of the religion's banned fungal sacrament. Like Snow White, she is white below, even as in one version, white as snow, and red above, and of course she is also little. Not only is Little Red consubstantial with the fly agaric, but the tale derives from patterns of the shamanic initiatory journey. Hence, in English, she wears a traveler's cap, or riding hood, with hanging hooded shawl as a cape about her shoulders, like the annalus ring characteristic of the Amanita. In fact, the story, however, it is told, for there are several quite different versions, including 2 different endings in the Grimm's collection, always narrates a journey. The child must follow a pathway without deviating from it. the moralizing and inevitable meaning imposed upon the tale, and no doubt that the eventual retellers understood about it. She meets a wolf on the pathway, and he misleads her into dallying on her way, noting the beauty of the woods. She leaves the path to pick flowers. While he gets to the grandmother's house before her, there are overtones of puberty and awakening to sexual experience. Hence, the little red ends up in bed with the wolf, masquerading as her granny whom he has eaten, and he may or may not devour Little Red, depending on the version. The wolf was early identified as her sexual seducer, hence, like the bear, her spiritual lover. The truer significance, and that's a reference to Beauty and the Beast, the Beauty and the Beast. The truer significance of Little Red in the wolf's bed, however, is probably the theme of her hibernating sleep. The rescue by the hunter may not be original, but the invention of Ludwig Tieck from his 1800 tragedy Leben unter des kleines Rotkapfens. I don't know. It's in German. I can't read German. I apologize. It is probably significant that Little Red, with the heart of Snow White, as well as the doubled Rose Maidens, is edible, and she carries with her a basket of goodies, sometimes apples, or in the Italian version, round cakes, along with medicinal doctored wine in a later version. This wine turns into a full bar, including several bottles of wine and hard liquor. In at least one early illustration, the wolf is depicted biting Little Red's cape while still in the forest, and an event not narrated in any telling of the tale. In the version where she is eaten by the wolf at grandmother's house, she is united with the grandmother, the goal of her journey, in the wolf's belly. The grandmother clearly represents wisdom, as well as the culmination of the triadic pattern of the female as maiden, mother, and crone. The Grimm's version preserves essential elements without understanding them, such as the red felt cap and the obvious lycanthropy of the witch lurking beneath the surface of the kindly granny. In the second ending of the Hassenplug that Hassenplug told the Grimm brothers, it is the wolf who gets eaten, and the grandmother is portrayed as the appropriate supremacy of the crone Bruja. This may be seen as the original version of the tale, which was reworked over the centuries with a patriarchal bias, to deny the woman their victory and portray over the helpless victims. The granny and Little Red prepare a cauldron of boiling water and trick the wolf to descend the chimney to his death. These boiling cauldrons have connotations of witchcraft and spiritual transformation that we will return to in chapter 10. Although the Virgin maintained an important role for the feminine in Christendom, her archetype is clearly an incomplete and one-sided representation because of Franz writes, she, quote, encompasses only the sublime and light aspects of her divine feminine principles, unquote. In fairy tales, however, the fuller pre-Christian expression of female spirituality occurs, which includes the crucial dark spark of the mother goddess. Now, we would argue that that has to do with magic, and that's obviously why we do not portray that if you are if you're a Christian. So Baby Yaga of Russian mythology, like the classical Hecate, the third in the Greek triform manifestation of the female as maiden, mother, and crone, is a perfect example of a powerful witch figure who embodies the double aspect of the goddess as beneficent destroyer with a clear demonstration of her pharmacological expertise. She lives in a rotating round house standing on chicken feet and flies through the air, sitting in a mortar which she steers with a pestle. The chicken feet are probably a reference to her association with psychoactive henbane. The mortar, moreover, is a symbol of feminine divinity. Thus, Mary is the vessel of the grace and the Holy Grail, which contains the alchemical. Again, we do not call the Eucharist alchemical. This guy obviously is coming from a different worldview. Prima materia and a divine secret. From the Latin terro, grind, and contritium, pulverized, as the mortar is derived contrite, to feel remorse and be penitent. There are various tales told of this popular grotesque skeleton of a woman whose house and garden fence is decorated with bones and skulls, since she guards the gateway to another world, but they usually involve the initiation of a child through a purveyance of magical food and drink, most often mushrooms, commonly depicted, at least in late illustrations, as fly agarics, again, the Amanita red and white muscaria mushroom. In one tale, Granny Yaga goes into the forest to gather herbs for a stew and finds a hedgehog seated atop a large mushroom and eating another. She intends to add the animal to the ingredients, but he convinces her to spare him since he can be useful to her in other ways. She allows him to finish eating the mushroom, whereupon he metamorphoses into a young boy. The story indicates that many animals are prone to eat the fly agaric, and thus to figure in the tradition about the consubstantial little people who materialize out of them. Thus, the basic pattern of red cap is similar to the myth of Persephone's abduction while picking a narcotic flower, whereupon she acquires the full power of her godhead, joined with her mother Demeter and the triform witch goddess Hecate. The little red and the wolf lover are both on a journey to grandmother's house, and the wolf was originally an inanimate spirit and the wolf sacrament, and hence no less consubstantial than she, with traditionally lupine fly agaric, so that regardless of who eats whom at grandmother's house, the goal of the two is all that matters as a shamanic initiation. The little red gets eaten, she suffers the classical pattern of an initiatory death, the period of the period of sequence separation the period of sequestration as a wolf, and resurrection. There is even a version where the wolf offers bits of the grandmother for Little Red to eat or even drink as a way to become united with the wisdom of the crone. Conversely, so John Pro is absolutely right. Cannibalism is always present in this stuff. It's very weird. Conversely, there is a version where Little Red Riding Hood is the wolf's initiator, as Snow White and Red Rose are the bears. He is on the red long road, and she introduces him to her true place in the forest, where she grows beneath the trees. Even in TX version, where the rescue by the hunter, it may be that the author has responded to a traditional theme not extant elsewhere. Thus, Little Red and the grandmother, after experiencing the death in the belly of the wolf, are restored whole again. The hunter cuts open the sleeping wolf's belly and discovers red cap shining inside, undigested, and then the grandmother, the wolf's hibernating sleep, appears to have been caused by the presence of the narcotic red cap within him. They fill the belly with stones so that the wolf cannot run away, but he dies, and the hunter skins the carcass and goes away with the pelt, which no doubt will be donned during another event of lycanthropy. All of this is too bizarre and mythopoetically correct to be a literary invitation. In fact, an Italian version collected and retold by Italo Galvino ends with a mob werewolf hunt. Okay. Interesting stuff. All right. The next one. Let's see. What's the next one? Next one is Snow White and Rapunzel. So we're going to move back to Snow White. Guys, smash that like if you could. Smash that like. And if you guys would appreciate the content on Church of the Eternal Logos, feel free to super chat using the Streamlabs link. Always would appreciate that. So now we're going to move to chapter 7, The Sleep Thorns. And it's titled Rose Brambles and Sewing Needles. Okay. And so he gets into Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, and Rapunzel here. So Snow White's mother conceived the riddle of the maiden's tricolor botanical identity when she pricked her finger with a needle while sewing at her window. It is, however, the pricking pines or the psychoactive nettle we have discovered in the thorn apple of Atlanta that lie encoded in the fairy tale of the Sleeping Beauty, known in Spanish as La Bella Durmiente del Bosque, and in French as La Belle au Bois Dormant. I butchered that, I apologize. It is entitled Little Briar Rose. By the Brothers Grimm, the Spanish and the French titles emphasize the enchanted bramble forest, while the German identifies the maiden who is consubstantial with the pricky briar rose, or rock rose thicket, and her hibernation. Notwithstanding, the title as Sleeping Beauty was not an invention of the Disney studio, but derives as well from the Grimm brothers' account. Quote, throughout all the land there spread a legend of Briar Rose, the Sleeping Beauty, unquote. This thicket or slumbering woods, rather than the beauty sleeping therein, actually is the important element in the tale. The mystic rose was often substituted for a visionary sacrament. The best known instance occurs in The Golden Ass by the 2nd century Latin novelist Apuleius, where the hero Lucius is turned into an ass as a first step in his eventual initiation into the mystery of Isis. Again, so we always see the goddess worshiping related to the psychedelics. He finally returns to human form when he eats a bunch of roses and sees the apotheosis of the goddess. Again, apotheosis. The bramble forest surrounding the sleeping maiden of the fairy tale represents the dangers that beset the initiate, who must penetrate to its center to pluck the psychoactive rose that is the object of his quest. It is significant that the earliest French version of the 14th century, written as a kind of romance novel, the hero who revives the princess is called the Pierced Forest, apparently connecting the story of the Parsifal and the Grail cycle and identifying him as the real hero of the tale. He's now, let's see, we're going to skip a little bit. So he's talking about Perrault. Perrault is he's a French gentleman. Charles Perrault is another French gentleman who collected a series of fairy tales. So we're going to skip a few paragraphs here because he's talking a lot about different here. I'll just go to the assimilation of antique names into fairy tales was common in the Renaissance, leading sophistication to narrative, and goes back to at least the earliest of the 11th and 12th centuries. In a 14th century Italian version, the maiden called Talia, or celebration of in good cheer, the muse of comedy. Perrault named her Aurora, or dawn. At the feast to celebrate the birth of his royal maiden, we have traditional theme of the uninvited guest. The 13th fairy was excluded. She showed up anyway, as is usually the case, and cursed the baby, saying that when she reached her 15th birthday, which is to say that when she came of age, she would prick her finger while sewing and would fall dead. But as it turned out, it was only an initiatory symbolic death, since the 12th fairy ameliorated the fate, converting it into a mere sleep of a century. In the earlier French version of the tale, recorded by Charles Perrault, the uninvited fairy is named Carabosse. The Grimm brothers' version omits her name. Perrault included the tale in the 1697 publication. It is the version used by Tchaikovsky in his 1890 ballet, where Carabosse is accompanied by a troupe of rats. The figure of Carabosse was already current in the mid-17th century France as a wretched fairy. Its etymology may derive from Greek karabos, crab, via the Latin carabus, a name given to a class of large black beetles, the Carabidae. In an earlier Italian version of the tale occurred circa 1635 in Gia Battista Basile, The Tale of Tales, also known as Mother Goose. The Grimm brothers and Perrault probably knew this version. It was supposedly evil fairy who plays the role of the maiden's initiator. To avoid the fated sleep, the king had ordained the destruction and the spindles of the land that one escaped incineration while lying in the attic storeroom at the tower of his own place. There the evil fairy, in the appointed time, disguised as a crone, set herself to spinning with it, where the curious girl discovered her and was intrigued and seduced into putting her hand to sewing herself, so that she pricked her finger with a needle. Thus the thorn of her own consubstantiality, identity, ostensibly a thorny dog rose. Despite his own medicinal properties, it is merely surrogate for the mystic rose, with its spines as the defining characteristic. As with the sexual innuendos of the encounter of the Little Red Cap, Little Red Riding Hood with Wolf Granny, the bloody flux of Little Rose's pricked finger has obvious connotations of menstruation and of then ripeness for the picking. She fell asleep, for the palace grew surrounded by a thicket of briars, each year ever more impenetrable. Many princes tried to make their way through the rose, sleeping at its center, always resulting in their death, until finally, after 100 years, the brambles magically flowered and parted, and the successful prince roused the maiden with his kiss and restored the whole slumbering kingdom. On the implication of a sexual trial for whoever seeks this woman secluded with the thicket, compare the punishment of the wanton wife Hosea. Quote, therefore I will block her road in thorn bushes and obstruct her path with a thicket, so that she can no longer follow her old ways, unquote. The maiden, however, can also be one who is put to the test, as in the Russian, French, and Catalonian versions, where the prince sleeps with the beauty without waking her, and she gives birth to twins, who must then find their unknown father. The shamanic consubstantiality with the maiden with the rose is even more explicit in the Italian version, which is the earliest recorded, that Basile entitled The Young Slave, narrated as the 8th diversion on the 2nd day of his Pentameron. The girl who will go eventually into the sleeping trance, let me change this to sleeping beauty. The girl who eventually go into the sleeping trance was magically conceived by the actual ingestion of a rose petal. Her mother had wagered with a group of fellow maidens, those whoever might jump safely over a particularly splendid rose tree that had appeared in their garden with a fully opened rose blooming on it, would win the quote the rose as a prize. Her daughter alone accomplished the trial of initiatory ordeal without touching the rose, although a single petal fell to the ground, which she quickly ate without the others perceiving it. 3 days later, she sensed that she was with child, and when she inquired of her fairy friends how the catastrophe might befallen her, they told her that it was no doubt the petal that she had swallowed. In this version, it is her mother who is an initiatory precipitates the accursed trance by leaving a comb in the maiden's hair. But again, there are implications of sexual maturation, since the comb is an ancient metaphor for the pendunda malibria, or for the religious simulacra of it. The sleep began in her 7th year, and the mother locked her away in a secret chamber within 7 crystal caskets, one within the other, that grew magically larger to contain the growing girl. Like so many layers of her persona, the doll-like pupa of the butterfly or psyche maturing within its chrysalis. Thus, these 7 stages of initiation represent something similar to the surrounding briar thicket. After the mother's death, she became the ward of her uncle, and his cruel new wife discovered the caskets, like some god that her husband had hidden away, and she inadvertently revives her by undoing the comb, whereupon she cuts her hair physically and abuses her as a slave girl for several years, hence the title of the tale, imposing upon her the traditional ordeals of initiation and loss of former identity, until ultimately the mystery of her birth is revealed when she is overheard telling the story of the rose bush to herself in the form of a magical little doll that represents herself reduced to miniature size, the nadir from which she is reborn to find her husband. We might compare Grimm's tale of Rapunzel. So let's go over here to Rapunzel now. Okay. We might compare Grimm's tale of Rapunzel, where the consubstantial maiden is named for the rampion herb that her mother stole from an enchantress garden and ate to conceive the child, who henceforth was claimed by the old witch and locked in a tower. When the prince gains access to the tower, she conceives twins, but he is discovered by the witch, who causes him to fall into a thorn bush, which puts out his sight, until after a much wandering he stumbles upon Rapunzel and his twins, exiled in a desert, and regains his sight from the droplet of her tears. The loss of ordinary sight occasioned by the thorn bush, followed by the lengthy wandering search in blindness, suggests the same initiatory scenario, culminating in the redemptive union with his beloved. Okay. All right. Are we still here, people? Looks like we still got some people. I told you this was going to be a lot of reading. A lot of reading. The next one is The Wicker Man. Let's see here. 146. Okay. Wicker Man. Let me change this. Oh, it's shopping. No wonder it's messed up. So, the prick of the mistletoe arrow that calls Baldar's comic sacrifice is well documented as a sacred plant of the Druids, who were so named as priests of the Druis or oak, which is a host for the semi-parasitic golden growth with its magical berries, the botanical original of Virgil's golden bough. The mistletoe is semi-parasitic since it is capable of photosynthesis but derives its moisture and most of its nutrients from the host tree, which varies and is most often actually the apple and only rarely the oak, but is also the oak that is revered as the sacred tree. The oak was considered the gateway to another realm, hence drus is a cognate both with tree, the predominant exemplar, and perhaps door in Old Irish. The word for both oak and door is dair in Old Welsh, and the words dare and dos. The mistletoe in itself is entheogenic, producing alkaloid toxins that are psychoactive and narcotic and antispasmodic, enlisted in the treatment of epilepsy and the convulsive symptoms of ergotism, known as St. Vitus's dance. Although higher dosages produce the same ecstatic and deadly convulsions, it also had been involved in the treatment of cancers for over 100 years. The plant's name occurs in Greek mythology as the figure of Ixion, Latin viscum album. The word mistletoe in English derives from the second element toe, meaning twig, with the first going back to the Sanskrit mahate, he urinates, cognate with Greek oimichin, to urinate, and micturate. Hence, the mistletoe is involved in the metaphoric complex of fly agaric and the metabolic of its toxin and urine. Remember, I talked about how the Siberian shamans drink the urine of the reindeer. In fact, there's another book over here I have on Mike Crowley wrote a book arguing that Vajrayana Buddhism has a psychedelic ritual as well. He believes is tied to the fly agaric, and how they have a ritual pot that people peed in and drank from. So the drinking of urine is a way to bypass much of the toxins. Okay. Ixion was bound to a fiery wheel of punishment in an attempted adulterous attack upon the goddess Hera, an episode that was the genesis of the whole race of horsemen called centaurs, who materialize along with werewolves and those little folkloric people that have already been mentioned. These creatures, quote, are essentially gremlins, little people with the legs of an ass or a goat. They are overall hairy and dark-skinned. Generally, they are benign, but like leprechauns and other diminutive beings, can be sly and devious. The centaur, satyr, phantasms are further represented, sometimes having one leg only, which connects them unequivocally to the tradition of folklore manifestations of the mushroom people and the entheogenic shadefoots. Okay. I'm not going to keep going. This goes on with the druidic psychedelic relationship between fly agaric and mistletoes. But just to save time, I'm only halfway through my list. So I'm going to skip forward to the little people on 162. The little people. Little people. Okay. So both Red Riding Hood and the Sleeping Beauty are characterized by the diminutive chin as little, even though the Dornosian end up 100 years later being old enough to marry. And the magical doll in Basile's version not only represents the maiden in her most reductive persona as initiate and ensuing guide to redemption, but is also essential to the tale that the uncle, who had forgotten his promise to get the doll at the fair, together with his sacrificial knife and his pumice stone to hone it, that is the niece's cursed cause, the river that lay in his path to rise up and block his way until he returned to it. An episode so bizarre that it obviously is essential to the story. This littleness of little people is appropriate for their consubstantiality with the botanic transmogrification into a shamanic sacrament, and, or conversely, the metamorphosis of that plant into little people who serve as their initiatory guides. Since the shaman's journey is visionary, quite naturally, the pathway is through the eye, and traditionally the archetypally across a river, sea, or watery boundary, as one looks into the eye itself like a window to the soul, recognized as such instinctively even by animal pets who eye their master's eye rather than the hand that feeds them. There appears a tiny image of the viewer reflected back seemingly beyond the pool of water, so that the viewer, but like every reflection opposite in all regards, it lurks at the center of the pupil, which was so named for the Latin creature pupa. Hence, the slave girl's uncle absolutely could not cross the river without the requested doll. Empedocles described the workings of the eye as a projected light emanating from fire deep beyond the pupil. The fire was the fire of the netherworld Smithy, tended by the dwarfish, one-eyed blacksmiths beneath the great waters of the primordial flood, the cosmic axis, and the journey quite literally down the eye into the cauldron of the volcano. So then he goes on for multiple sections on the small people. I'm going to skip Tom Thumb. If you guys can, Tom Thumb. This is another Grimm's brother fairy tale. Tom Thumb. See if I put in Tom Thumb right here, you'll see what I'm talking about. Tom Thumb. Tom Thumb. See, it's just too long. I told you this stuff. If I read all this, I'd be here for like 3-4 hours. So I'm going to skip Tom Thumb, and I'm going to go to 177. Actually, I'm just going to go to. I'm going to skip the Elf King. He talks a lot about Norse mythology, the Elf King and the Pygmy. In this section, he talks about really all these different types of mythologies of the Elf Kings. Again, these elves, the self-transforming machine elves, the gnomes, the small people that people encounter when they go into these psychedelic states. Yeah. So I'm going to skip that. That's a long section. That is a long section. Then he has a whole thing on his horse and the hound. So how horses and hounds are used. Magical children. This one's fairly interesting. But I think I would rather read the fairies. So I'm just going to read this first opening paragraph on the fairies, and then I'm going to read this section on how fairies are related to weddings and fairy tales. It's pretty interesting. But the theme of the encounter with mushroom creatures so blatantly presented in the Kamchatal tale about Keztuk and the Amanita fairies and the Obajiwa tale of the younger brother occurs, although more discreetly in disguise with courtly romance, also in the medieval French, or more exactly the Anglo-Norman or Briton tradition collected by Marie de France. In addition to her interest in lycanthropy, as we saw in her tale of the werewolf Bisclevet, she recorded tales of the fairy beings. In one of her lays, she tells of the encounter of the Arthurian knight Sir Lanvel, after whom the poem is named, with some fairies. During his stay in Cardool in Wales, King Arthur had assembled his knights together to reward them for their services, but he forgot to invite Sir Lanvel. Nor did any of the others think of him, since everyone envied him for his beauty and his bravery, and although they feigned friendship, they would have been pleased to see something bad befall him. The impoverished knight, although the son of a king of high degree, was far from his heritage, and had used up all his wealth. Despondently he rode his horse off into the forest. There he dismounted, but the horse seemed so nervous that he decided to release it and turn it free to run through the meadow. He lay himself down on the ground beside a running stream, using his folded mantle as a pillow, and there he stayed pondering his misfortune. Then, as if risen downstream out of nowhere, two beautiful ladies of different ages, dressed in dark crimson, approached him. Quote, a bull and was born by the elder maiden, golden, delicate, finely made. The younger maiden carried a towel, unquote. The ladies bid him follow them, since their mistress had sent them in search of a certain Sir Lanvel. Lanvel obeys and follows them, but on foot without his horse. Finally they arrive at a pavilion with an eagle made of gold perched atop, where the knight meets their mistress, who was even more beautiful than the others, dressed only in chemise, I don't even know what that is, with a precious cloak of white ermine trimmed in alexandrine crimson thrown carelessly over her, leaving her side seductively naked and open to view. He becomes immediately enamored of her as soon as he sees her, but it is the lady herself who openly declares her love to Lanvel, going so far that they both have carnal knowledge of each other. Quote, she gives her love, and what's more, her body. Now Lanvel is on his way, unquote. The lady then tells Lanvel to go away, but proposes a pact. If he doesn't reveal to anyone the secret of his love, he will always have whatever riches he desires, and she herself will be there with him every time he summons her. But if he breaks the agreement, she will disappear forever from his life. Lanvel gladly accepts. Then the two maidens offer him the bowl and the towel that they were carrying so that he may wash his hands, and he dines in the tent with the fairy queen. After which they bring him his horse, and Lanvel departs on horseback, transformed now into a rich man. Thus the knight, doubtful, not knowing what to believe, arrives back at the city, where he finds his formerly impoverished house so miraculously transformed, and henceforth there wasn't another knight to whom he could not offer hospitality. The ceremonial washing of Lanvel's hands in the towel and the water in the golden bowl offered by two maidens is an important detail. It imitates the ritual in the Mass, which the priest concludes the Eucharist. Thus, the pavilion with the golden eagle was actually the tabernacle, and Lanvel's encounter with the lady is a parody of the most sacred moment in the Mass. There is nothing surprising that since Marie de France's lays, as is typical of medieval poetry, are often quite ribald, even scrupulous, emphasized by her short rhyming verses like Daggergrill, with particular lines not doubt given special prominence in the sung performance. For example, her comment on the fact that the lady gave Landville her love and her body. Quote, now Landville's on the highway, unquote. And this is reference to the French that it was written in. The knight's encounter with the lady puts him into a fantasy realm, a secret life, so that he repeatedly makes love to the lady and appears unaccountably blessed, although only he can see her and her voice. Okay, we're going to skip to 202. Fairy flies and weddings. The most salient characteristic here, let me put fairies. The most salient characteristic of fairies is their passionate love of weddings. The final episodes of both Landval and Yannick occur around the time of the summer solstice. For the trial of Landval is the feast of John the Baptist, which is the 24th of June. The 24th of June, and the discovery of Moldemark's tomb and the coronation of Yannick occurs in the feast of St. Aaron, the 22nd of June. The following night, the 23rd of June, is St. John Eve's, the Midsummer's Night, which is the moment of the greatest rift between the realms, allowing for the apparition of these amorous fairies into the world of humankind. Shakespeare placed this epiphany of the fairies on this date in his Midsummer Night's Dream to celebrate the wedding of Duke of Athens and his Amazon queen, although there are actually 3 marriages, and it turns into a comedy of mismatched unions. As we saw with regard to Ixion and the Druidic Wicker Man, throughout Europe it was and still is habitual to celebrate this festival of St. John's Eve by lighting ritual bonfires. This happens generally throughout Spain, although more particularly in Catalonia and also in France. It was customary in the Middle Ages to burn bones in these bonfires, hence their name, as a substitute for the actual human victim, after which the ashes were spread on the fields to ward off destructive animals. This pagan custom was considered sacrilegious by the clergy, who saw it as an imitation of the execution of John the Baptist, whose bones were destroyed after his death to avoid the establishment of a cult in his name. Fairy beings are notoriously fond of such bones. It is traditional to leave a child's tooth for the good, quote, fairy to collect, the tooth fairy, who is expected to replace it with a token gift as an indication that the child has been spared from the ritual from the ritual offering of the bonfire or the bone fire. It was also the custom of the British Isles to toss the tooth into the bonfire. The Irish folk art, there are receptacles for depositing the tooth that depict the tooth fairy seated atop a mushroom. These ritual bonfires convey the essence of the summer solstice, that is to say, the fact that the sun has reached its apex, after which it begins its gradual descent. But these fires also represent the luminosity of the fairy creatures who are wont to appear on the night, often visible in the flickering firefly. All flying insects are probably interchangeable in this metaphoric depiction of the spirits in transit, traceable back to the ancient Greek vase painting of the tiny winged creatures swarming around the boat of Charon, who will ferry them across to the other world. Thus, the butterfly is emblematic of the soul itself, called Psyche or Suke in Greek. One of Shakespeare's 4 named fairies in the Midnight Summer's Dream is called Moth, another Cobweb. Similarly, the various insects are also all probably involved with the fungal personae. Hence, the firefly is also called a lightning bug, descriptive as well as the darting great speed with which the fairies move. They also were thought to materialize as the flickering light that appears hovering over marshes and bogs, presumably from the spontaneous ignition of the emerging gases, although the ignis fatuus, or fool's fire, the illumination is due to static electricity from tectonic stress. All these lights are thought to lure people to death or the underworld, and hence blamed on the devil under the familiar names that mask his identity. As William, it is the will, the wisp, with the wisp or broom, and as Jack or jack-o'-lantern, who is associated with the green man, who lures beneficent spirits into gardens while keeping others at bay. In Spanish fairy traditions, the familia, an impish house spirit or duende of the Balearic Islands, materializes in the form of little lights which can be captured and put into black bottles. After several days, the light will change into an actual familia and thus become a servant of its captor, like the Arabian jinns who live in magical lamps, as in the tales of the 1001 Nights. Such flickering creatures are often consubstantial with magical plants. Thus, in the town of Santa Eulalia del Rio, there is a bridge, Pont de Domini, or the Devil's Bridge, obviously a passage across the subtle divide made by the devil suddenly all at once, exactly at the dawn of John the Baptist's day. There grows nearby a little flower that is said to live for only a few seconds, and that allows whoever picks it and keeps it immediately in a black bottle to see the familias. In Avala, we find a parallel story. It is thought that the fern produces an imaginary flower that grows only on St. John's Eve, and whoever eats the flower will be able to see, hence a visionary drug, the memures, the Basque duendes, only visible, obviously, on St. John's Eve and capable of being hunted and imprisoned like the familias. Something similar occurs in Catalonia with the menerios, or the duendes, who live in caves guarded by ferocious dragons and giants. They can be approached only on the stroke of midnight on St. John's Eve. These menerios are born, like the familias and the memures, from the seeds of a plant that grows only on the dawn of St. John Baptist's Day. And anyone who captures one of them will have a servant who will do his will of his master. Shakespeare's fairies are luminous lighting like their tapers from their fairy glow worm's eyes. I don't even know. The glowworm being another name for fireflies. As for the wax needed for the tapers, it is harvested from the honey bags of the humblebees. The displacement of the glow of the firefly's tail is in keeping with the visionary metaphor. Thus the fairies are instructed to gamble in his eyes. The whole trope of the elfin creatures is all yon fairy O's and eyes of light. The wings plucked from, quote, painted butterflies, unquote, will serve to fan the moonbeams from sleeping eyes upon waking. At the night's enchantment grows to its close, Oberon tells the fairies to give glimmering light throughout the house as the final blessing, hoping as light as a bird from briar, with a pun on light. These folkloric traditions confirm the metaphoric involvement of the fairy creatures with the various varieties of insect spirits and the plants that allow them to be seen or that summon them to existence. The other two named fairies in the Midnight Summer's Dream have plant names: peas blossom, mustard seed. Nor should we forget that in medieval pharmacology, John the Baptist's Day was designated for the ideal date for collecting the plants utilized in various herbal concoctions. Thus, it was a particular magic plant in Midsummer's Night Dream that participates in the whole intrigue of poor Titania's deluded passion for the lowly bottom, when her altered eye, upon waking, becomes enthralled to her mistaken perception of his beauty. Oberon reveals to the Luton Horace, like Puck, the secret of a flower whose juice poured on his eyes of someone sleeping will make one enamored with the first creature seen upon awakening. The flower changed its nature when an arrow from Cupid's quiver fell on it. It fell upon a western flower. This is a quote from Midsummer's Night. Before milk white, now purple with love's wound, and maidens call it love and idleness. Fetch me that flower, the herb I showed thee once. The juice of it, on sleeping eyelids laid, will make a man or a woman madly dote upon the next live creature that it sees. Without doubt, this plant that maidens call love and idleness is the central visionary agent in the play. The name probably hints of autoeroticism. It has a reputation since antiquity as an aphrodisiac and for predicting a lover's mate. The flower is traditionally viola in its various species, and its magical quality derives from the blossom, which suggests the appearance of little fairy face rather than from any psychoactive components. Its other folk names are equally indicative of the fairy lover: Johnny Jump Up, i.e. with an erection; Cuddle Me, Love Idol; Kiss Her in the Buttery, where the churning is done; and Meet Me in the Entry, probably to the other world. In German, it is, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, or the little stepmother, probably has a name for the fairy godmother. Nonetheless, as in Shakespeare's comedy, the plant's connotations clearly are visionary. Its common name since the mid-15th century as the pansy derives from the French panacée, thought, which strongly suggests its involvement in Gnostic traditions. Similarly, it is called pensamiento in Spanish. Its pagan sanctity was assimilated into Christianity as indicated by its medieval name Herba Triuntantis, herb of the Trinity, or Trinitaria in Spanish, associating it with the order of the Trinitarians of the Holy Trinity. The Trinity was suggested by its characteristic three colors. The viol tricolor was an ancient Greek ion or violet. It was involved in the special miraculous birth and empowerment of figures such as the shaman Iamos, who lay hidden in as an infant in a thicket drenched with the tawny, all porphyry radiance of violets, as he was fed with the venom of the honeybees and serpents of the godlike child Ion, who was conceived when his mother picked and presumably saffron-colored crocus flower. Okay. Wow. This is a mouthful to read. The last one that I want to read is The Witch's Cauldron. That's the last section here that I want to get into. The Witch's Cauldron. So, guys, if you have any super chats you'd like to throw in, anybody who's still with me here, I will be reading those next. The Witch's Cauldron. And, guys, remember, too, what's interesting about the witch, I've talked about the broomstick, right? Witches are known to fly on broomsticks. Well, this is, according to some researchers, another reference to psychedelics, that the witches, these older crone women, postmenopausal, would have secret knowledge about herbs, and they would put these various ointments on the broomstick, and they would place the broomstick between their legs so it would have direct contact with their vulva. And so having direct contact to the glands around the vulva, these ointments, these herbal ointments, would be better to enter into their bloodstream, so they would have intoxicating experiences, basically psychedelic experiences. So it's believed by some people that the reason why witches fly on brooms is because they put psychedelic ointments on the broomsticks and put the broomsticks between their legs so that it would get into their bloodstream as quick as possible. So interesting little tidbit there. Here we're going to be talking a little bit about Hansel and Gretel. Okay. So Hansel and Gretel. This is a section on the Witch's Cauldron. The Witch's Cauldron. I'm going to end on this one. And the Grimm brothers' tale of Hansel and Gretel, a poor family, a father's evil stepmother, an evil stepmother, and a son and daughter cannot find enough to eat every day. So the stepmother, against the father's wishes, decides to get rid of the children, abandoning them to their ordeal in the forest. Hansel, however, marked their path by dropping pebbles along the way so that they could return home. The father abandoned them to a second time, and this time Hansel threw crumbs of bread, but birds ate them during the night, so that children lost their way. Penetrating ever deeper into the forest, they came upon a beautiful snow-white bird sitting on a bough, which sang so delightfully that they stood there, enchanted and listened to it. And when its song was over, it spread its wings and flew away from them. And they followed it until they reached the little house, on the roof which it alighted. And when they approached the little house, they saw that it was built of bread and covered with cakes, but that the windows were of clear sugar. The bird is the children's guide to the place of transformation. Therein there lived an old wicked witch, who caught them nibbling on her Eucharistic house. Again, not very Christian. And convinced the two to stay with her. It is she who still complete the initiatory work of the stepmother, for the house of sweets was only a bait for them, since she intended to eat them. The witch pinned Hansel up in her stable like an animal and fed them every day to fatten them, checking his progress by feeling the finger he extended through the grating. But although he fattened Hansel, always showed her a bone left over from what was eaten the previous night. Frustrated by the apparent continued unripeness and impatient with her cannibalistic meal, shout out to John Pro, was right, she decided to eat Gretel, too, although she had starved her to just skin and bones and worked her ragged as her servant. Her way of preparing Hansel for the feast was specifically dismemberment from her cauldron. Quote, early in the morning, Gretel had to go out and hang up the cauldron with the water and light the fire, unquote. But Gretel was going to be the side dish of bread for the meal. Quote, we will bake first, said the old woman. I had already eaten of the oven and keened the dough. Under the ruse that they were baking bread, she told her to creep into the oven, as big as a room, to test if it was well heated. Gretel understood the witch's intention and deceived her, saying that she didn't know what she was supposed to do. The witch crept in to demonstrate, and Gretel pushed her and locked the oven's door, and the witch died, and Gretel freed her brother. They both discovered in the house the traditional riches of the netherworld, many chests full of pearls and jewels, and they loaded their pockets with much wealth as they could carry. When they returned home, they showed their father the pearls and jewels and their profit from the ordeal. The stepmother, simultaneously her forest proxy, had died, and they all lived happily ever after, restored and whole. The oven womb is the tale of another version of the motherly witch's cauldron. These are the women who eat children, taking them back into their belly wombs for the essential recombination of the severed bodies, cooking them in their cauldron or oven for the second birth that marks their attainment of transcendence. It is the cauldron that confers immortality, resurrecting the initiate after a symbolic death. Okay. It goes on with how cauldrons are used in Norse mythology, how cauldrons are used in Greek mythology, how cauldrons are used in Hittite mythology, but we are not going to get into any of that. So anyways, guys, that's going to conclude today's stream. I'm going to hop into the super chats. Please smash that like for the few of you that are still here. I told you there was going to be a lot of reading today. A lot of reading. So anyways, thank you all for being here. I'm going to now read some of the super chats. First super chat comes from Matthew. And he says, how much would we have to pay you to analyze a Perfect Circle's first album, lyrics/themes? Every story you've told tonight reminds me of it. A Perfect Circles. I'm not even familiar with the band The Perfect Circles. Perfect Circles first album. Let me look here. Well, you give me a nice super chat and I'll do it. I don't care. It's negotiable, Matthew. I'm not familiar with Perfect Circle's first album. But yeah, you send me a nice super chat. We can talk about it. Anyways, Storm the Cat. throws in $10. He says, I have learned a lot about Orthodoxy from you. I was raised Protestant, and I think their answers for things are vague and wishy-washy. And they talk like a politician, whereas Orthodoxy is more concrete and specific, and it all comes together systematically. Yeah, Storm the Cat, I totally agree with that, brother. That I appreciate you that you've mentioned that you've learned a lot about Orthodoxy from me. I'm humbled. I hope that I haven't led you astray in any way. I agree with you. Protestantism, I think in the way that they talk is political, is you're picking up on the sort of juridical aspect of Protestantism, and that it is very rationalistic. It's not holistic like Orthodoxy is. Orthodoxy is a holistic system that confers upon other pieces of it. And I think that is why when people learn more about Orthodoxy, things just click. They make sense. It resonates with them. So I totally agree with you, Storm the Cat, that the way Protestants talk is definitely wishy-washy. And it's funny because if you ask a Protestant or a Catholic about Orthodox theology, they'll actually accuse us as being the wishy-washy ones because we don't have what they consider a systematic theology, which is ridiculous. We do have a sort of systematic theology. It's just you have to learn a lot about it to understand the system, because in Orthodoxy, everything depends on something else. So without the understanding of the energy essence, you're not going to understand theosis. Without understanding theosis, you're not going to understand the point of death by death and the crucifixion. Without that stuff, you're not going to understand. Again, if you don't have the energy essence and you don't have theosis, you're not going to understand, or the death by death, you're not going to understand why Jesus is fully God and fully man. You have to have all these things. You have to have all these things. So Orthodoxy frustrates many Western minds who want like a definition. For example, that's the problem with the Eucharist with the Catholics. You know, the Protestants say the Eucharist is just a symbol. So it's just symbolic. You don't have to do it all the time. Whereas the Catholics say, no, it's the real thing. It's literally a bloody mess. When I drink it, I'm drinking blood. You know, well, Orthodoxy, we call it the real body and blood, but it's a bloodless sacrifice. And for us, it's a real symbol. So the transubstantiation itself is like a definitional understanding of a mystery. Well, if God's mystery is making the body and blood the Eucharist, how are you going to define something that is by definition like mysterious and transcendental? So Orthodoxy is not the same thing as the Western concepts. So the West has definitions for everything, and a lot of it is unrelated to other parts, whereas in our Orthodox theology, everything is interconnected. Everything is interconnected. And so the transubstantiation is really a sort of magical ritual, and that's why even the grace, the meritocracy of grace in Catholicism, right? You get the grace of the Pope, and then the people under the priest under him get his grace, and then whoever your priest, the cardinals, and then their districts, and then their priests, they have the grace based on their cardinal, and then you as a Catholic, the grace that you get is totally based on the grace of the priest performing the Eucharist or performing the Mass, really. So we don't have that. In Orthodoxy, we have a direct relationship to the grace of God through the uncreated energies, because grace itself is an uncreated energy. So very different. So I agree, Storm the Cat. And thank you very much, brother. I think it was Storm the Cat who's going to be in Indiana, so shout out to you, brother. When you're in the Hoosier State, shout out to you. Let's see. Dr. Klaus Schwab says David's repeating what he heard in theology class. Well, you heard it for the first time. We've talked about the difference in the Eucharist a long time. And actually, if you go back to the video I did on symbolism and archetypes, I think, I read an article from Jonathan Paggio, who talked about the real symbol, and then we've talked about that. So what Dr. Klaus Schwab's referring to is our Wednesday night theology course. If you guys are interested, with Subdeacon Mark and I, we do a theology class where we dive deep, and we're reading this book here, so you could feel free to buy it. We're only halfway through, so plenty of time. It's called The Hymn of Entry by Archimandrite Vasileios. You can join us for free on Wednesday nights. Dr. Klaus Schwab has. We're trying to pull him back from the verge of the Great Reset, but he's pretty stubborn. So, anyways, guys, smash that like. I know tonight's stream was a lot of reading, but hope some of you guys caught something insightful from it. I know that it's a unique. Let me turn this off. It was a unique, again, the book that we read tonight is called The Hidden World, Shamanic and Pagan, Survival of Pagan Shamanic Themes in European Fairy Tales. Again, I disagree with some of his arguments. As I said, he sees psychedelics in everything. Sometimes I feel like he may contradict himself. Sometimes he brings up very interesting insights that I was not aware of that are insightful. And then the other thing is that it's self-referential. He refers back to works by many of the authors that are working on that particular book. And then, of course, the Eucharist is always brought in with their worldview, although, again, they don't even look at the Eucharist or Scripture from the tradition that actually writes it. So, anyways, may the blessings of Yeshua HaMashiach be on us all. Hacker Culture. Crispy Johnson says, who feels inspired to buy this book? It's an interesting book. It's maybe like $40, $50, so maybe it's not the most ideal book unless you can. I'm Matthew. It's Maynard from Tool. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't really listen to much metal music. I know Tool's really big into Alex Gray's stuff and a lot of the psychedelic culture. I'm personally not into it. It's white people. John World says it's white people music. Yeah, that's about accurate. Ryan Wynn says, yeah, I'm not a big fan of or anything. I'm not either. Thomas G, man, you guys just had me watching tons of werewolf transformations and all the best scenes from that London movie. Well, now you can look at it from a new perspective. Again, if you could always read some of this stuff on the werewolf mythology, and then when you rewatch these movies, it's always good. Chad. Oh, hey guys, give a shout out to Chad Bombadil. And I hope everything's going good, Chad. God bless you and your family, Chad. It was an unfortunate situation that he brought to light a few streams ago about being a nurse of, I think, 12 years, and he's got 3 kids and a wife, and they're trying to make him get the stabby. So I hope that, Chad, I hope you've come to a resolution with that, whether you prayed, God's given you some insight, or how what you've ever come to with your family or your wife. That I hope everything's good, and God bless you, brother. God bless you. I hope you, again, if all else fails, move to a state that's banned the passport, so at least you can continue work. And if you're in California, maybe it's a little cheaper. So God bless you, Chad. I hope you enjoy this stream. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of heady reading. It's better to probably listen to this as a podcast. Dr. Klaus Schwab says the werewolf is actually going through Masonic apotheosis. Basically. Chad says, thank you, brother. All prayers helped. I firmly will not take the stab. Thank you, Chad. That's great, brother. God's great, brother. God bless you and your family, man. I know it's a tough decision, but maybe you can get a religious exemption or move to another state and get that worked out. So God bless you, Chad. Anyways, guys, it looks like that's the end of the Super Chats. I hope everybody has a wonderful night. Please smash that like on your way out if you haven't. And I will be back Saturday with another stream. I have no idea what the topic will be, but I assume it should be should be insightful. I have no idea. Maybe if you guys have anybody's listening to this, give some shout outs for topic ideas in the comment section. Can always use that. Dangerfield Henley says John Webster's The White Devil is an Elizabethan play where lycanthropy plays a central role in the plot. Early werewolfism in literature. Oh, interesting. That's very interesting. I didn't even know that the official term for werewolf transformation was lycanthropy till I got into this book. That was a new one for me. I hadn't heard that before. But anyways, God bless you all. God bless you, Dr. Klaus Schwab. Even despite the Great Reset, I'm still a fan of yours. Always coming with the funny memes and the funny quips. God bless you, Dangerfield Henley. God bless Chad. God bless John. God bless Norman Ernesto. God bless Crispy Johnson. I'll check you guys out in the next stream. So until next time, as always.